Hello, and welcome to the Divorced Dadvocate, divorce support for dads, where we help dads create a healthy and less traumatic divorce. My name is Jude Sandoval, and I'm your host. I created this podcast and the Divorced Advocate community as a result of my own high conflict divorce, and because you as a dad deserve all the resources necessary to thrive through this challenging time. I encourage you to check out our website at thedivorcedadvocate.com, where there are resources that correspond to this episode, as well as free access to our membership community, where you will find live meetings, free workshops and courses, private discussion groups, and more. And now, on to this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. I'm so incredibly excited about my guest this week. And she is the founder of Isaak Law Firm, which was created to fight exclusively for the rights of men in family law. Prior to becoming an attorney, she served in the U.S. Army as an active duty soldier, where she attended college and obtained her bachelor's degree and master's degree in psychology. And after an honorable discharge from the military, she worked as a child and adolescent therapist, as well as an adjunct professor of psychology. Additionally, she has taught classes in juvenile delinquency and criminal justice. Welcome, Melissa Isaak. How you doing, Melissa?
I am good. How are you? I'm glad to be here today.
I am doing incredibly well, and I'm so thrilled, like I said, to have you. It seems to be very challenging to just have attorneys in general come on the show and talk about things, which I understand in our litigious society these days. But I know that you are definitely not somebody who is afraid to speak her mind and to get out there and really state the truth.
That's right.
Is what it comes down to. But before we get talking about things, share a little bit about yourself and maybe some of like speaking the truth and what, kind of the environment around that in the family law court.
Okay. Well, I got into this because when I was growing up, I watched the way that my mother treated my father, and it seemed like whatever he did, he came out on the losing end. Whether she made false allegations against him, whether she dictated when he could and when he couldn't see us. She would dictate every aspect of our relationship, of course, to our detriment. And I really was very naive. And as I grew up thinking like, God, these people just don't know. Like the judges, they don't know. My mother was like 4'10" and my dad's like 6'4". So my dad gets out of the Marines, got back from Vietnam, and he ran into this little tiny lady. But it was crazy to me, even as a child, every time she would say something, the court just took it as truth. And it didn't matter what he did or what evidence he had or what he said. It didn't matter. She always seemed to be believed. So, and then when I worked as a child therapist, I worked in an inpatient environment, an inpatient psychiatric hospital, and I worked in an outpatient for a private child psychiatrist. And there was this common theme where I would see where you would have these moms who weren't acting in the best interest of their kids at all. And then the dads were absent. Either the dads just weren't there by choice. And that happens sometimes. I hate to say it, but it does. Or these dads were like forced out and the kid's the one paying the price. So there was this common theme of bad moms and absent dads. So, when I went to law school with the intention on doing family law. And I was so naive to think, what, the judges and these CPS organizations, and they just don't get it. They just don't understand, So, and it has been completely frustrating since then, because now I realize they do understand and they don't care, because you look at domestic violence in the, court world isn't an action that we have to protect women from, right? It's an industry. Child support is not a means to support children. It's an industry. It's a business of itself and if people realized how much money the states and the court systems make off of these programs that are hidden behind, we just have to support kids, it would be absolutely disgusting. And it is disgusting once you realize these things and you see how many people are making money off the backs of mainly dads not being able to see their kids and false allegations and the like. So it's been a frustrating journey, and it's going to continue to be a frustrating journey because, politicians, they talk a good game, but then they do a whole lot of nothing. So
Yeah.
I am digressing, but that's why I got into this, is just because the way I saw that my dad was treated, and I didn't feel there was anybody out there saying what needed to be said. And so that's why I'm here.
Well, it's a blessing that you are here. And you touched on something that I don't know that we've ever chatted about on the show, and that is the child support industry. So, I hadn't contemplated. We kind of put together a structure and a framework for what we're going to talk about today. But I think I want to talk about that a little bit so that you can give the dads that are listening kind of the lay of the land around what to expect with that. And in doing that, the environment is going to be really important as to what to expect. So let's talk about child support industry as an industry and how that is structured. Can you just walk us through that as briefly as possible, right? It is pretty complex, but
Yes.
as briefly as possible.
So there's something called Title 4D of the Social Security Act. And when that act was voted on and put into effect, these little child support agencies started popping up in all the various different states, because what Title 4D does is it essentially rapes our Social Security fund, but it takes money from the Social Security fund and it pays the states to collect child support. So, and there's different numbers. So if on average the states collect, or the feds reimburse the states 66 cents for every dollar they collect. And all they do is they collect it from the non-custodial parent, usually the dad, disperse it to the mom, 66 cents on the dollar. Now, the state can get more than 66 cents if the mother, for instance, is receiving TANF funds, food stamps, other types of assistance. Then, they can get up to $5 on the dollar. I've heard even up to $12 on the dollar. So it's a very big business. And of course, the more money that they collect from these non-custodial parents and disperse out, the more money they get reimbursed from the feds. So you look at this from a shared parenting perspective. If you have parents that have equal rights, week on, week off, whatever the case may be, well, child support is often reduced or there's none at all. So if you have no child support or greatly reduced child support, that's less money that the states are going to get from the federal government. And so this is my opinion, that's the exact reason we are having such a hard time passing shared parenting legislation, is because those Title 4D funds are going to be essentially gone. Now, there's other type. There's Title B funds. We can go down this rabbit hole and take a week on it. But that's the gist of it, is when you go to court, and, I found that there are some judges who are, and they told us they are just against, they won't do shared custody at all. But then you look at some of this money, how it funnels back into the court system. So you wonder, certainly there has to be some incentive there for the judges to do that. But child support, from the state's perspective, when you read through the laws, it's a money maker for the states. What interest does the state have in making sure dads see their kids on the weekend? That's the only answer I can come up with, is they get paid.
Yeah. So if you think about divorces, the number of divorces that happen across the country and the number of times within those divorces that there is child custody determinations made, this is a huge business. We're not talking tens of thousands, we're talking billions of dollars that are transferring through states and the federal government, et cetera.
We are talking billions, and that's in the context of a divorce. But even unmarried dads, so some states have, like in Alabama, you can go back retroactive for 2 years. So let's say that you're not married, a woman has a baby, 2 years later, she hits you out of the blue with child support papers. You owe 2 years worth of retroactive child support. So,
Right.
we generally think this of a context of a divorce, but unwed dads, and they even have it worse off, right? Because they're not even presumed to be the legal father at all. So yeah, anytime that you have a child that's born and a relationship breaks down, either in a context of a marriage or just a relationship where you're unmarried, that's right, that child support hits the table. And in fact, in Alabama, if child support is waived, or if you at all deviate from the guidelines that the legislature puts out there, you have to state with good reason, this is why we deviated, and the judge may or may not accept your deviation. So, and I've only had this happen like twice in 15 years, but where the parties agreed to no child support, and the judge wouldn't accept it. Well,
Hmm.
why would the judge? What does the judge care? If you have two parents that say, you know what, this is what we're going to do. This is what works for us. This is how we're going to take care of the kids. You don't pay me anything. There's other financial considerations a lot of the time. What does this
Right.
judge care? Like, who are you to bring these parties in and say, no, that doesn't work for me? But anyway, that's the law here in Alabama. So, and the laws vary in different states, but there's
Right.
usually every state has these guidelines that lawyers and litigants generally have to adhere to.
Right. And the fact that it's you mentioned that if there's other programs that are involved with the families, this becomes a regressive tax on dads, because if the poorer you are, the more likely you are going to be involved in some of these other programs. And then if that's the case, then the states are getting more money from poorer families and poorer fathers that have less of an opportunity and less of an ability to be able to defend themselves in court, or it is defending, really. I mean, it's not even just getting a fair trial. It's really you're on the defensive. It's almost criminal. It's almost like you're having to defend your livelihood and your ability to survive in life sometimes, particularly if you're poor. And then I know each of the courts have their outreach to help people represent themselves, but man, the system is not set up. It is not user friendly.
It is not user friendly, and you're right. There is a disparate impact on dads of lesser means, and they're the ones that typically go to jail. And because child support is a civil matter, you're not even necessarily, and I don't know the laws in every state, but you're not even necessarily entitled to counsel. So, we've had guys been in jail for months and say, man, I don't know what to do. I can't get out and I can't pay. Well, we've had to do these old fashioned habeas corpus petitions to get them out, because the federal law even supports, if you can't pay before you go to jail for contempt, there has to be a showing of an inability to pay. Despite these guys showing an inability to pay, they're still getting locked up and dragged off to jail. But because it's a civil matter, they don't know what to do. But it definitely has a disparate impact upon dads of lesser means, lesser resources, without a doubt.
Yeah, and that's crazy, because none of this, like you said, has anything to do with the best interest of the children. Dad in jail because he can't pay child support is not cultivating a relationship with the children that is going to help benefit them in the future. Now, yes, there's an understanding, or there's an argument to be made that if he's not supporting, it's making it difficult. But there's also the argument that a father involved in the life is not just financial, that there are greater things to a father's involvement than just a credit card or a paycheck or a bank account, et cetera, which is part of what this disparity in what's happening with the family law courts and the disparity in what's happening in family law courts and what we're actually hearing out there, because it's not the same unless you're a dad and you've gone through it and you're experiencing it, right?
That's correct. That's correct. Yep. And unfortunately, a lot of these dads don't know what they're getting themselves into until it's on their doorsteps and it's too late. So I think managing expectations is really important as well. But again, when you're a kid, you go to the state house, you go to the courtrooms, or you might watch judges argue in the Supreme Court, and you're like, wow, this is the justice system at work. And you have facts and you have evidence and you have the law, like what could go wrong, right?
Yeah.
And you realize, a lot of dads are in this situation and they're like, yeah, but the law says this. I'm like, you can't rely on the law. You can't rely on judges following the law. The Court of Appeals is overwhelmed with briefs of violations, and these are just the people who can afford to go to the Court of Appeals.
Exactly.
So, in my experience, you have the laws, and we follow the law, but then you have these domestic relations judges who have almost unfettered discretion, and they take it too far a lot of the time. A lot of times at the expense of the father-child relationship.
Right. So I feel like that was one of my greatest realizations in going through a high conflict divorce and then having it be high conflict in the subsequent years, was that I thought, oh, okay, the court's going to say this, and then it will happen. And that's actually just not true. And then that they're going to have to follow the law because the statute's written. And then I had a judge completely disregard the statute. And and then it becomes an order. And I didn't have any money to go back. And my attorney said, well, it's going to cost you X amount to go back and make it right. I'm like, but it's wrong. It's like completely wrong. It's against the statute. It's written right here. Can't we just call them and tell them that they made a mistake? No, you've got to go through a motion. You got to do that. It's going to cost how many thousands of dollars? I'm like, holy crap. I just spent however many thousands of dollars and I don't have the ability because this judge made a mistake or blatantly disregarded or whatever it was. And then you're screwed. And then, and I've got resources, right? Some of these dads just don't, and it's awful. And it's damaging our children. And so let's talk about, so I guess this kind of falls into what we wanted to talk about, like what some of the major things you want to pay attention to, depending on where you're at in your divorce process, whether that's, just thinking and contemplating it in the middle of it or at the end. So this would be in the beginning. So what do dads need to be aware of? And what would you say, regarding what we just talked about, this child support industry, kind of the lay of the land with family law court, and they're going to get into, what do they need to be aware of, and what do they need to prepare if they're going to pull the trigger on filing for divorce?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, this is Jude with a quick reminder about the Divorced Advocate Foundation for Fathers, which is our nonprofit that helps dads through divorce with legal education, free or reduced cost coaching, and mental health resources. If you own a business or know someone who does, there's an easy way to help by connecting credit card processing through our partner program. Part of the fees go straight to the foundation with no added cost to the business, and 98% of businesses are actually able to save money on their processing fees. It's a win-win. So if you know a business that accepts credit cards, get them in touch with me by sending a warm introduction email to jude@thedivorcedadvocate.com or give me a call directly at 720-255-1021.
So I divorce, family court is a very emotional place, both for men and for women, and women and men express emotions in different ways. So as a woman, if I get upset, I might just start crying. And as a man, when you get upset, you might show frustration, right? But frustration can be misconstrued as anger. And next thing you know, you have to go to anger management, right? I want you guys to understand, emotions win cases for women and emotions lose cases for men. I can't reiterate enough. So when this process starts and when the unfairness kicks in and you're going to feel it will, you have to understand that there's a difference between reacting and responding. All right. When you react to situations, guys, I can tell you, you're going to get yourself in trouble. Everything that you say, right, is going to be screenshot. All your text messages are going to be saved. Your calls are probably going to be recorded. Friends and family of hers are going to come in and probably talk about, what a horrible, violent person you are, even if it's not true. But the way you respond to these situations could mean the end of your case or it could mean the win of your case. But you have got to keep your emotions in check. All right. And any showing of frustration, right, and if it's construed as anger, courts love anger management. I don't know what the deal is, but gosh, they love anger management. I think they get a ton of money for every person who attends, because even if the allegation is made, well, maybe you should go to anger management. Okay. But control your emotions and don't, you guys, if she is cursing at you, she's calling you every name in the book, don't respond in kind. Just don't. Okay. There's a difference between, me calling you a name and you calling me a name, because inevitably I'm frustrated. The court's going to take that consideration and you're just an abusive person. You're just emotionally abusive, Right. So I had a case where this woman said, and he just, he called me a bitch. He's verbally abusive of me. He called me a bitch. And so I went down all the things she did. I'm like, Mommy, does the shoe fit? Like, are you a bitch? So, and the judge kind of like his head like, wow, okay. But I mean, there's some things where you acting like a bitch. If the shoe fits, you just wear that, right? But how about this, guys? How about we just avoid having to have that conversation in front of the judge altogether? You just don't do it. All right. So you have to understand that all the communications, everything that you do, everything you're going to say, you're probably going to have to justify in front of a court. So respond versus react. Okay. Huge difference there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so as men during this process, what I've found is that because we are men and we have a masculine nature, we really like linear paths. We like to know where things are going. We like order. And divorce is none of that. It is chaotic. It is uncertain. You just don't know what your future is going to look like. And for men, that is really, really, really hard. And so not being able to control any of that is hard for men. But what you just described is the one thing that you can control during your divorce, and that is your emotions and what you do with them when you come up. So if it's something that you're looking to control, guys, that you can have some kind of structure around, that is the one thing that you can do, is how you're going to react to that. Because like Melissa said, it can make or break things. And if you're getting into this and you know that you might have a nesting agreement, or you might have, where you're still living in the same house, you want to make sure that you are putting yourself in a position that is going to give you long-term success, and not because, man, I'm thinking in my head about one specific client, but literally we found out after that his ex had been 6 months planning, like, to set him up to be able to position herself to be in a better place to then file for a divorce. It was just waiting for an opportunity, and she converted on it. There was an opportunity, and it made his life difficult as heck. And so that's not to say every potential wife out there is doing that, but if things are starting to go sideways and the relationship is breaking down, then pay attention to what it is that you need to be, to protect yourself, because you're not just protecting yourself, you're protecting your children too. And like you said, Melissa, like, there's there are bad moms out there. We don't hear it. There's no TV shows about it. There's no commercials showing it. Single motherhood and motherhood is just, the superpower out there, but it's just not the reality of the situation. And I would say there's equally as many bad moms as there are as bad dads out there. It's just, we don't hear about it.
Without a doubt. And I'm glad you brought that up, because you can probably, I think as a general rule, women know they're going to get divorced before men do. And that's just a general. Women are planners. And so, you're going to know that ahead of time. So, but the best time to plan or to gather evidence for a divorce is when there's no divorce at all. Okay, as soon as divorces are filed, as soon as papers are served, people will stop talking to you. People will lock up. She's going to start treating you differently as soon as you're served, probably getting advice from her attorney at that point. So if, and there's some conversations you can only have once. And I'm not pro divorce. So, I'm married, I'm happily married. I think kids need their children, but there are some conversations you can only have one time. And I say this because if things are going south and something doesn't feel right, you guys don't ignore your gut, because that's what guys do. They're like, well, maybe I'm going to hope it'll get better. Yeah. But record some of these conversations. If something doesn't seem right and you're having a conversation, she's talking about whatever it is that doesn't make sense to you, I would hit the record button. There's some times where I have had guys come in, a lot of times actually, where they would say, it was probably a few months back. I was talking, her sister was over, and her sister kind of looked at me and shook her head and said, look, let's sit down and have a talk later. And they have a talk later that night. And she's like, look, I'm going to say this one time, I'm not saying it again. She's cheating on you. And then you go back to the sister, and the sister has flipped by then. Or when you have, if you get screenshots if you see texts on your wife's phone from another man, okay, don't confront her until after you take the screenshots. You get that evidence, because that's going to be gone. All right. And a lot of times women who cheat, all right, there's something called forgiveness under the law, to where if you forgive her and move on with your marriage, resume normal sexual activities, you can't go back and bring that up in a subsequent divorce, because there's forgiveness. So there's attorneys who will actually tell their clients, that these women, go back and have sex with him, just rekindle things for a little while, get forgiveness under the law. But all that aside, women do generally know they're getting divorced before men. So you want to document. You want to create a case even before the case is filed, or at least make notes of things, guys. Keep text messages, keep all this stuff. Because what you want to stay away from is a he said, she said. Now,
Yeah.
family court is nothing but a big giant he said, she said. So we sit there, woman gets up on the stand. He told me I was never going to see the kids again. He told me he was going to kidnap them. He grabbed me by my hair and he threw me to the ground. Okay. So dad gets up there and he's like, that's not true. I've never said that. In fact, she's the one who told me I was never going to see the kids again. She punched me in the chest and then she called the police and said I hit her. Right.
Right.
So I can't tell you how many guys that we've had. They have little recorders. Okay. And you got to check your state's law because some states don't
Right.
allow surreptitious recording. But we've had several clients. I can't tell you how many who woman gets up on the stand. She gives her recitation. Man gets up on the stand. And at that point, he gives his side of the story. We push play. End of story, guys. He said,
Right.
she said is over. And for the most part, all right, as much as I have criticisms of family court judges, for the most part, with few exception, once they hear the truth, all right, it's a done deal. It's a done deal. Once you lie to the judges, you pretty much lose credibility. But you want to stay away from a he said, she said. Okay. If you want to give your child's mother, $500 to go buy diapers, don't give it in cash, guys. Okay.
Mm.
You're going to get up there and say, well, I gave her $500. She can get up there and say, well, no, I don't. Her attorney's going to say, did you get a receipt? No, who does that? Nobody does
Right.
that. But use Venmo or use Cash App or use some other means of it. But whatever you do, the best of your ability, take a witness with you, communicate in text, record if your state allows, but avoid a he said, she said, because that's where you get in trouble because it comes into a credibility issue then. And look, guys, in my experience, women are better actors than men. I'm telling you. We can have proof that these women are lying and they get up on the stand and they just lie away. Like one time I got up and I was like, bravo. And I get an objection from the other side. But once we play the proof that it's a blatant lie, boy, the judges, sometimes you can see them roll their heads back like, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Avoid he said, she said. All right. If you can, avoid it at all costs.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're one of the few attorneys that would ever do something, I think, in court, because all the attorneys that I've come in contact with want to just make it feel good in court. Don't want to piss off the judge. Don't want to piss off opposing counsel. You're going to see him again some other time, and you want your case to go smoothly, so you don't have to have a bad name or deal with anything, which is a whole nother conversation about the niche market, the cottage industry of how family law attorneys and judges and how they get appointed and who's doing what. But we're not going to go there today. But I think maybe in the future we can talk a little more about that, because it's incestuous is probably the best word I can come up with. But so you kind of moved us into what to do and what to expect when you're going through the process. And you made a great point. We've talked a lot on the show before, and that is because women are the ones that file 70+% of the time. They've really thought about this for a period of time. And it could be like, my client, my client was, she had hired her attorney 6 months before filing. And so she had probably literally been thinking about this for a year beforehand, trying to prepare and figure all this out. So that's really hard for, and I know this was my experience too, to start, like, when it's starting to happen, to just shift that mindset of, okay, I need to get into some sort of mode of protecting myself and protecting my family, because you're in protecting yourself, you are also protecting your children. So that's another mindset shift for dads oftentimes is, oh, I'm destroying the family, or this is going to destroy the family. And they're behind the eight ball and trying to figure out these mental and emotional issues that are going on. And then you're just getting railroaded, because then, like you said, somebody might be tweaking you or doing something, and you don't think to, I think back to the number of times I wish I had recorded a conversation, or I wish that I had documented something, but man, I wasn't even thinking that. I was thinking my family's falling apart. What's going to happen to my children? I've got all of this stuff going on. So I say that to say also in that pre-contemplation part, or like you said, if you feel like something's off, because you might not be pursuing it, and most dads aren't the ones pursuing it. But if you just start to feel like something's off, don't ignore it, like you said, and then start like doing something about it. Start digging into stuff, start checking emails if well, you shouldn't be doing that because that's illegal to look at somebody's emails, but just start to pay attention to what's going on. And then the second part, and I'll get your comments on this also, is start to build whatever you need around you. Like you said, to maybe if you're not paying attention to the finances, or you're not the one that handles the finances, start paying attention to the finances, where your tax returns are. Maybe get an accountant or a financial person to help you figure that out. And then mentally and emotionally get into therapy, or find a coach, find a divorce coach. A divorce coach is going to help you look at, here's the thing with coaching. I'm not just tooting my horn, is that a divorce coach is going to help you look for some of these signs, whereas an attorney is great at knowing the process and stuff. But man, look, you guys are great, but you don't want to pay $300, $400, $500 an hour for them to help you find the signs of maybe you're getting divorced. So that's where a divorce coach will come in and be able to help you position and talk about this stuff and see where you're at, and hopefully help you salvage, because divorce coaches don't necessarily want to help you through the divorce. They want to help you salvage the relationship if possible, first and foremost. But if not, that you're positioned in to be able to go through this process in a more effective way. So thoughts on that? To hear the rest of this episode and access the corresponding resources, visit thedivorcedadvocate.com and become a member of our community. It's free to join and will provide you with the resources you deserve as a divorced or divorcing dad. Thank you for listening. God bless, and I'll talk with you next week.